For this class, you're invited to bring a candle and also some items to compost, like grass, leaves, and vegetable scraps.
Oh, welcome, welcome, welcome. We get to be with the one, the only Devorah Brous. I'm very, very excited about this. She is an old friend. I met her in the desert like 15 years ago, I think. And her presence and her passion and her commitment really touched me and left the seed of potency, in her wake. And she's been, you saw her bio, so you got to see, that she's been working with the land for a long time. She's a permaculture designer and herbalist, regenerative consultant. Isn't that great? That's like such a great new role in our new world. Like that, there's people here that consult about regeneration, not recycling, but regeneration. And she works a lot with gardens, with individuals, with institutions. She's also been on the front lines of working with Indigenous people, working on the front lines of some of the most toughest, most complicated activism, and I would say most dangerous activism efforts that we have on this planet. And I'm not going to speak too much about that just because that's a part of Devorah's story. And when I come to these classes and I look at how do we create space for the biggest story that we can live in, how do we make space for that, and understanding that we speak through myth and we speak through metaphor. And to me, storytelling, the essence of it, we've got our spider as our archetype who's weaving all the different pieces together, and there's the gardener, there's the person that's tending the soil, those people that will listen, there's the planting the seeds of possibility through our stories. And it really, like, gardening is kind of like one of the main metaphors that I understand about what is sacred storytelling. And I feel like if you can learn how to be a great gardener, you can learn how to be a great storyteller. And so it was really exciting as I was talking to Devorah and what her just, when I was thinking about this piece, Devorah came to mind, and I was like, what a gift to get to be with this woman in her presence and to kind of weave these different elements. So she's going to really talk to you about gardening today. Isn't that great? And I'm going to invite you to listen to the both and, right? Listen to the literal parts of how can you tend your land, but also listening for the metaphors behind it of what does this have to show you and open you to this realm of storytelling. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over the reins to Miss Devorah. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I just feel so grateful to be part of this work with you and to get to meet this container, not just pop in as a guest teacher, but to actually be with this community through this process of Speak Your Spark and step into the chat room with a bunch of you. It's already been really, really so powerful for me. To begin, I'd like to ask you to light your candle and just to bring it right into the screen such that we can see that glimmer of the candlelight in your eyes. Take a moment to light your candle and really arrive. Yeah, beautiful. If you can lift it up a little bit so everyone can see, like bring your eyes into the screen. So you don't see like a bunch of boxes, but you see a bunch of candle lights, not only from the candles, but from our eyes. Yeah, look at that. Like I wish all of Zoom always looked like this. The kind of glimmer and twinkle that I see right now. And look at that. Okay, and also I invite you to take a little bit of smudge if there's some plant that you are comfortable with working with, that you have next to you, near you, plant that grows on your land, plant that helps you cleanse and clear and release. So you can surrender into this space and fully be here with us. Okay, you can put your candle back and sit into your seat just comfortably because I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement and just to note that I am a white person and I would be speaking with you today about land. And so much of what I have come to understand about the land, I have learned from working with Indigenous people. And so for me, beginning with speaking to a land acknowledgement is like the most sacred way that I can open up this space that we're going to share. I also want to note that land acknowledgements can sometimes tend to be a little perfunctory, and that like sometimes just asking us to pop in the chat where you're from is is like a way of checking a box. And I'd like to invite us to go deeper into the exploration today of what an acknowledgement can actually look like if we're storytellers and we're writing our own acknowledgement and speaking our own respect, and blessing to the peoples who lived in our lands beforehand. And so I want to acknowledge the traditional and the ancestral unceded current territories of the Tongva Nation, the Kismet and the Chumash and the Tataviam and Serrano and the Louisiano and Gabrielino peoples also lived on the lands all around what is currently known today as the City of Angels or Los Angeles. I also want to honor the Bedouin people, the people who were the original stewards of Israel and Palestine, which is my ancestral homeland. Um, I want to honor all of the people who have stewarded these lands for thousands of years before their forced removal by colonization. So, this acknowledgement also gets personal because my ability to tend the land at my family's urban homestead is a direct result of the erasure and the forced removal and the enslavement of Indigenous peoples. To this day, they have not recovered from that. They still are enduring systems of oppression that uproot and commodify their lives, their lands, and their foodways. So today, we're here in Zoom and we're gathered as descendants of colonizers and of the colonized, of enslaved peoples and enslavers, of immigrants and refugees, and also of Indigenous peoples. We all have a role to play in healing the divides that have literally poisoned the air between us, that have toxified the sacred waters, and that have sliced very deep gashes throughout the land. So may we find ways to grow a renewed relationship with nature that's really rooted in right relationship, that is reciprocity and involves reparations. May this land acknowledgement spur us all into deeper learning about what right action is for each one of us as we stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples in the ongoing struggle for safety and land and sovereignty. So I dedicate today's learning to the Tongva Nation, and I'm going to make a donation on behalf of this learning today to the Tongva Tarahat Paksavha Conservancy. So, what I'd like to ask you to do now is to craft a sentence that feels really right to you. You're going to acknowledge the original stewards of your land. Um, and sometimes I think that it could also be in the form of a of your quest, that you may be looking to learn more about these original people. Maybe go beyond just what you have done in the past with naming the original stewards. And I'll pop in the chat the I think you've probably already seen this with some of the other guest teachers, but in case you don't know um, the names of the people who lived on the lands that you currently call home, go ahead and just pop that into your browser. Do a quick search. We have time. And think of some language that makes all of this real for you, not just the names of lands that are not on any map we ever see, or people that we have never met in many cases, but actually craft language that you would feel comfortable using that might explain that you're part of a process to learn more about how to acknowledge the lands of the people who lived here before you did, before I did, before we did. And when you're ready, go ahead and pop that into the chat so we can all kind of learn from each other proactive ways of using language around land acknowledgement. Loke, Loke.
I acknowledge that the people, the Kanaka Maoli, the land of Hawaii, the lands, the waters, continue to be under the illegal occupation of the United States and suffer from the oppression of the way of living in harmony with all of life, from gathering and educating and celebrating in their traditional ways, leading to the poisoning, pollution, disharmonious exploitation, spiritual denial, and invisibility. And I'm grateful to be here.
Mm, that's very powerful. Thank you.
Here on the West Coast, many nations overlapped and continue to overlap their territories. These include Coast Salish, Hokshun, and Tsuminus, which I don't rightly know how to pronounce. I've moved here recently and I'm just beginning the process of getting to know this land and reaching out to those who tended it. They were pushed off most of this island, now called Salt Spring, and only recently are many people turning to learn how they tended this land, now that we are in such disarray. There will be local events inviting people. I've learned that there will be upcoming local events inviting people to learn about their history, as well as ways to support their ongoing work, and I'm hoping to participate when that comes.
Mm, wonderful.
I don't know, some spirit has moved through me, Devorah, where apparently I'm the problem child today. The resistance that somehow has emerged in me is so big. And I am in deep honor and gratitude for the Tongva and the Chumash who I know lived on this land. And I feel the magic of this place. I'm so grateful to all of those beings who have protected this canyon so that it's still wild and green and whatever is here. But when asked to do this, all I could really authentically, honestly speak to was my lack, was the lack of knowing those people and a true desire not to romanticize how they treated this land when I don't know. I don't know how this land was treated. So that's part of my acknowledgement, like my acknowledgement of a great disruption, of a great disturbance of what it is to be a migrant and an immigrant and a refugee. And that to each place I travel without roots, I don't have the stories of what happened here.
Part of my reason for asking us to do this work is so that we can step into the not knowing and the vulnerability and the honesty, the naked truth of really having to face the fact that it's unsettling to not know this information, to not know the people, to not know the ways. And so I want to thank you for sharing. I think what we tend to do is a quick post in the chat of where we're from, just to kind of let people know that we know, right? Does that resonate? It's like, yeah, yeah, I'm on this. I know it's the Tongva people, so I'll just pop that in the chat. And maybe we're doing the same thing with pronouns. So we're going to speak to that a little bit also. We're beginning to recognize that we don't see everything as clearly as we think we do. And so we're beginning to check our own assumptions. And we're being schooled in that, really schooled by trans people and queer people and non-gender conforming people, um, in how to do that. And I want to also share that we're also being schooled by indigenous people in how to do that. And there's this absolutely beautiful idea that Robin Wall Kimmerer shares. She's just a breathtaking being on this planet, indigenous plant botanist and professor, internationally acclaimed author. Maybe many of you have read Braiding Sweetgrass or some of her other pieces. But she really speaks to this idea of gratitude and being in relationship and reciprocal relationship with plants and with the natural world. And how can we give back to the natural world? Well, she speaks about pronouns. She speaks about this idea of, instead of referring to nature as it in our funny language, as we do, we it nature. She has spoken with the elders of her lands and asked what word might be a better replacement for like an objectifying something. And in order to relate to what their response has been, she suggests that we need to really tap into gratitude. And gratitude is not just, I'm grateful for it. It's stepping out of the idea that nature is an object, but really studying nature and our relationship with nature as a subject. And so this is very compelling for me. And so her suggestion is that we replace the word it with the word ki, which is ki, ki. And so the word ki in the traditional Haudenosaunee language means a living being instead of it. So a flower is ki, and a forest is ki. It's a living being instead of I visited it yesterday. And so I want to ask you to reflect a little bit on this idea. Can you imagine taking on a practice? So many of us really have come to respect the practice of sharing our pronouns when we introduce ourselves. It's kind of become second nature to not have those kind of assumptions. Thank you. Yes, Theodore, kin is for the plural. Ki, I'd love to ask you to kind of wrestle with this shift of language. I know for so many of us, like using the word they or them to refer to an individual is really tricky. It's like it's hard, and so I think that's the point of it, is to not have assumptions about who we are meeting with, but to come at every interaction with that kind of sacred humility. And so I'd like to ask you to kind of wrestle with your discomfort, perhaps, or with your curiosity, with what Leah calls your playfulness, and pop in the chat the way, like your kind of your first way of imagining a sentence with the word ki or kin. The maple trees are dropping their leaves. Kin are so beautiful this time of year. Would you like to unmute and read some of the things that are in the chat, folks? Let's hear our voices. Cedar lives here outside my door, yet it took me years to even notice ki. Mm. Loke, would you also please share what you mentioned about the translation in Hawaii for Aina as you read your phrase?
The word Aina in Hawaii, Kanaka Maoli word, means the web of life. And people use it to say land, but it includes the land. I'm getting chicken skin just saying this. Land, the waters, and all of life, the entire web of life.
Mm, it's gorgeous.
I am key.
Mm. Sometimes we feel kind of compelled to give a gender to plants. And I think that this invitation to use ki or kin kind of elevates our awareness that that maybe we are in that place that Leah mentioned earlier of not knowing, and that's okay to not know the gender of a plant that sits beside you, but to name it ki, a living being, part of the web of life, rather than kind of to make an assumption. Oh, he just kind of feels like a he to me, right? How quickly we jump there. Thank you. Y'all are just, oof, just you, just right there. If this inspires you, please feel free to reach out to Robin Wall Kimmerer on social media, and you can share that we talked about this together, and that it's something you might think about actually wanting to bring into your circles and your spheres of influence. Because I think that having the feedback from you to this extremely clear ask is a really wonderful way to be in conversation with Indigenous elder elders that are coming up with very tangible ideas rather than just speaking to what is missing and what's wrong. This is very tangible. This is very real. This is how we can step out of objectifying nature. And when we're in a place of actually beginning to really understand the ravens and really listen in to their song, then we can understand how to pass on that sense of wonder that generates joy. We can pass that on to our friends, our family members. We can embody that. The last thing I'll say right now about Robin Wall Kimmerer is that when I heard about this research project um, that shows that kids can identify 100 different corporate logos, but they can only identify 10 plants. I thought it's really on us to change that, and it's tricky. I have two children, and they're both extremely pulled in by the world. Like they've been watching the Dodgers games every night, and like those commercials and the intensity of all of it is like that's not as nature is not quite as compelling for them as what the media puts out there all the time. And so I think it's on us to find interesting ways to weave our lives back into a seamless integration with with kin, with nature. Okay. And I thank you for just walking with me on that path. And it kind of like it occurs to me that there's so much poetry in this storytelling room. So what I'd like to do next is I think I'll just invite you to look at my screen. I'm gonna I'm gonna read a poem to you, and then what I'm gonna do is ask you about phrases that pop, and we're gonna do like a kind of mashup so that the phrases that pop for you are the ones that you pop into the chat. We'll do like a sweet mashup. This poet. Her name is Aurora Levine Morales. And this poem is available through her project, Rimunim. And she has a Patreon where she invites folks to support her work as a storyteller and as a social justice pioneer. And you can make donations to her through Patreon. So if this poem speaks to you as it speaks to me, um, please look her up. Please know this person. Um, they are a queer radical organizer that lives in Puerto Rico and does some absolutely compelling work in the world. So I invite you to just check out their Patreon. And if you'd like, you can close your eyes and just listen to these words. There's a couple more paragraphs that you don't see in the screen right now. Just listen to these words and then pop the words into the chat that speak to you. And you can do several, you can have several turns with this. So one phrase and then another. You don't have to think in your head right now. This is more like what's coming through you. Oh, that phrase really speaks to me. Boom, I'm going to pop it into my community chat room. Okay, it's just like that. It's like quick. As many entries as you want, you're going to pop right in. Okay, here we go. For those of you who like to close your eyes, you can just go ahead and do so now. Let them go like birds released from cages. Let them go like fruit rinds, giving themselves to the soil. Let them go like pebbles rolling away underfoot on a steep trail. Let them go like crumbs scattered for pigeons. Let them go like sweat dripping from our brows. If we've messed up, let it go into the great compost heap and become the nutrients for new seeds, intentions, blessings, pink blossomed, azure ripe with tender food. If others have hurt us, let clean water irrigate the wounds and let the runoff water effortless gardens. Let those effortless gardens spring up between the furrows of sleeping fields, between the cracks of unswept sidewalks. Take over the untended lawns. Let the grudges crumble to dust. Let shame dissolve into loam. Let each harsh word we hurl at ourselves be turned into petals before they land. Let everything, all of it, be recycled. Let the trash become jewels we string into necklaces and drape around each other's necks. Let us enter the year of fallows, burdenless, loose limbed. Lie down on the dark earth and do nothing. Let tiny rootlets emerge from our fingers. Let ourselves be covered with moss. And instead of doing, become the sapling students of the elder trees and be ourselves into the new year and be ourselves toward the new world that waits like an autumn bulb packed with unimagined colors, ready to wake and bloom just under the skin of what is. Can I have a volunteer that would like to read this poem that we have created, this poem that has never been stated before, has never been shared in the world? Stephanie, this poem of poems, this poem from storytellers.
It's very tiny. Go, like birds released from cages, soil, pebbles, crumbs, pigeons, sweat. Let it go to the great compost heap. Compost, nutrients, seeds, intentions, giving themselves compost heap, nutrients for new seeds, food, hurt, water, ripe with tender food, irrigate, azure ripe with tender food, irrigate the wounds, irrigate wounds. Let clean water irrigate the wounds. Effortless furrows of the sleeping fields, effortless gardens, sleeping fields, untended. Take over untended lands, dust, unswept sidewalks, untended lawns, like shame dissolved into loam, cracks of unswept sidewalks, harsh, shame dissolved into loam, hurl, harsh word, dissolve, petals, land, grudges crumble to dust, be turned into petals, petals, petals before they land, let everything be recycled. Let shame dissolve into loam, shame dissolved into loam, be recycled. We drape around each other's necks, trash to jewels, fallows, burdenless, loose-limbed, burdenless. Let trash become jewels, tiny rootlets, dark earth, entering the year of fallows, do nothing. Let tiny rootlets emerge, moss, covered with moss, covered with moss. Instead of doing, become. Become the sapling students of elder trees. Be ourselves. Spalling students of elder trees, be ourselves. And be ourselves toward the new world that waits. Autumn bowl, ready to wake and bloom. What is under the skin of what is. Bloom under the skin of what is. What is just under the skin of what is. Wake and bloom just under the skin. Let the runoff effortlessly water the gardens. Let them go. If others hurt us, let water into my silence. I hear your voice. Let it go to the great compost heap. Nutrients for new seeds. Nutrients, blessings. It nourishes and mind and soul and key. I lost my place. Just a moment. And key is smiling onto us.
Mm. Can I invite you to lie down? If you'd like to take your shoes off, if you'd like to throw a blanket over yourself, just sort of take in a little bit of this feeling in an embodied way. If you're wearing socks, you can take those off too. I'd love for you to be barefoot if you are comfortable doing that. Sit down, lie down. You can turn your screens off. So just release. Feel a gentle process of how easeful it is to inhale and exhale. Take a moment to breathe into your heart center. Take a moment to feel the earth underneath you, all around you. Take a moment to breathe the oxygen that comes from a plant or a tree near you. That key, that keen, bring it inside of you. Take a moment to share back, to give back your carbon dioxide. There's so much power in yesterday's full moon around this idea of shedding and releasing. Imagine your body is just releasing right now. Anything that doesn't need to be held anymore, it's just dropping, just like leaves in the trees around us. In some parts of the country, the leaves are just beginning to change colors. In other parts of the country, leaves have already begun to drop, scattering carbon back into the earth. Leave the leaves there. They don't need to be raked and hauled away in a plastic bag to some landfill. Leave these leaves alone. Perhaps imagine your own leaves dropping. Projects or relationships or worries, leaves that you don't need to hold anymore. They can just drop down to feed the earth with carbon. Imagine allowing anything that needs to be released just to go. Just all of those variables that are known and unknown, all of the weight that maybe you tend to store in your neck or your shoulders, in your lower back, other places in your body. Imagine just releasing and letting all of that go to fall away with grace, with ease, or with a splat, just letting it go, giving it over to the earth. And what we're going to do now, you can keep your eyes closed, is we're going to have a small meditation, and then I will invite you to go outside. You'll need your phone, so you can set a timer. We'll be outside for about 15 minutes and then we'll come back together. You'll need something special, like a stone or a pine cone or a branch or a crystal, something you're ready to rematriate and give back to the land, to bury into the soil. And you can take a moment to just reflect on where you might find something like that. Perhaps it's in one of your altars. Perhaps it's on the land. What we're going to do now is just tap into the that space between each of us that is connected through the mycelial threads, that image that animates a sense of unity, even though we are each in our own homes, on our own lands. We're each journeying together into a vulnerable place where we can grow. And so, my invitation is to really get comfortable as we do. I guide you through a small meditation that'll have a little instruction for you when you're outside for those 15 minutes. I love this idea of rooting down to rise up. And so, right now, your body is rooting down, just like a seed that plunges into fertile soils. In order to rise up, we must root down and take our time. So, we're going to listen in, and maybe in a way that we've never been able to listen before, maybe tapping a new level of that skill of listening as we unearth a story of the people who lived on our land prior, a story of the people who lived on the land where we live now. So we're going to go into this journey of, of reciprocity. I see this as a kind of mystical exploration of the roots that we don't often have a chance to see. So we sometimes may even forget they're there. So, in deepening this meditation, you'll have the chance to go outside, walk ideally barefoot, or sit still without your shoes on. And take your time as you move through the keen right outside your door. Feel into the presence of an invited person who is walking toward you. They have just arrived. Imagine how you introduce yourself to this person. What words come through you when you greet this person who lived on your land before you? Share something about your relationship to this place. Maybe it's a memory that you have dug up from the soil, or maybe it's a story about a tree that you've befriended, or the ravens that you've been singing and listening to. Maybe it's a sound that you've heard of the branches of one of your trees, soughing, murmuring, moaning with pleasure, bending with the wind, murmuring to you. And perhaps this person would also like to share. This person who was uprooted and removed to clear the way for you to live where you live today. I can't really tell, only you will know, but this could be a person that's right around your age. Or perhaps it's an elder, or maybe it's a youth who's wise in the ways of their culture and aware of the impact that colonization and the occupation of the place they once called home is no longer their home. This person you are now inviting onto the land that you live on and steward today has accepted an invitation to join you. Perhaps you'd like to sit or walk together a bit, or perhaps you'd like to just be still and listen to the sounds around you. Imagine offering this person a comfortable place to sit, perhaps something warm to drink. Feel into the unsettling nature of this conversation and breathe with me. Fill your body with ki. Imagine you are now a guest visitor being guided to see the landscape that you are most familiar with completely new eyes. Imagine this person before you has a family, quirks, friends, and a woven community that lived and gathered around the land where you live today. Imagine being playful and asking some questions about what ki was like, what the kin felt like, looked like, smelled like before the erasure, before the landscape was uprooted, and before the families and the neighbors were forcibly removed. Breathe with me here. Imagine you're looking into the kind, soft eyes of a person sitting right there with you. Maybe you detect the melancholy in their eyes. Maybe you sense this person is on their heels with you. The context is uncomfortable. It's not clear what to say or not say. It's unsettling. Severe trauma has destroyed this person's sense of home, of safety, and of belonging. Severe trauma may have also destroyed your own sense of home, of safety, and of belonging. Consider finding a way to communicate even a small slice of what you might be feeling. Perhaps you commit to taking responsibility from here and learning more, figuring out, wrestling, studying, exploring, journaling, painting, trying to learn the way that you can show up as an ally or an accomplice or a friend. As you stand or walk together on the land, consider asking this person to point out what parts of the landscape markings are familiar, what they love, what they miss about the land. Maybe what spot is calling to them in this moment for sanctuary, for an offering. Knowing that we're all indirectly benefiting from the loss of livelihood due to severed ties on the land, and knowing that this has had very severe repercussions on the collective health of Indigenous nations, and knowing that many of the cultural plant medicine practices and the traditional food ways have been disrupted, knowing that colonialism has desecrated sacred burial grounds and that the practices today around commodification of land involve the selling of it as real estate. Knowing this is hard, breathe with me here. Consider how the gentle breeze that you feel on your cheek while you're standing together might act as a balm. Consider how the silence is okay. It is actually medicine. You don't have to know what to say or what to do. Just be. Consider asking this person about a way to honor and feed and make reparations. Consider asking this person what you personally can do to help rematriate the land. Maybe you have a crystal that wants to go back home to the soil. Something beautiful you were given or that you purchased or that you found. Maybe it's time to bring that home. Listen into the stillness for a whispering of the ways of the land. And then find your way to thank this guide, this angelic presence. Be sure to mark the spot where you've sat or stood together. Listen in. Listen with stillness and an open invitation to hear even the hard things that you might hear right now. Listen with patience. Listen with unobstructed focus. Listen with unfiltered clarity. Breathe with me here. I'm going to ask you to gently rub your hands together and slowly ready yourself to go outside for 15 minutes. When your hands are nice and warm, put them on your heart. And you can begin to move your body. Imagine offering the land acknowledgement that you shared earlier outside when you go outside right now. Your own personal, poetic, animated acknowledgement. When you're finished with this 15-minute exploration, place your stone or your shell or pine cone or a crystal or some other gift on the land where you sat or stood. And then we'll come back together.
At this point, you're invited to go outside for about 15 minutes and follow Devorah's suggestions.
I hope you're doing well. What has come up for you? How did that exercise feel?
If you're doing this class with others, you can take some time now to share and reflect upon your experiences. If you're doing this alone, you might journal about your experiences. So this one is called Synthesis.